So let's talk about eating disorders in communities of color. So obviously things will look different across different communities and different cultures. One of the things that I think is really important is that people who tend to live in these communities understand that they're being seen, and understanding that the things that they're dealing with are a little bit different. And so one of the things that can be a huge contributing factor to eating disorders in communities of color is just the extra stress around them. So we're looking at things like racism, poverty, sexism in some of these communities, and the impact that that has on just like your everyday mental health, and really kind of what that means in terms of how you think about your body and how you think about food. So one of the things that I, always try to tell people, and like this isn't really an upper, but I think it's good to know, is that basically America is just steeped in diet culture. It's what we do. It's how we think about everything. And that's kind of how we move and shake and think about our bodies and food and all of those things. Diet culture is based in fat phobia, which is the fear of being fat or gaining weight. And fat phobia is based in racism. And so fat phobia really started when minority bodies were larger and they started to be seen as something that was more desirable. And so instead of just allowing that to be, kind of starting to chastise those bodies and shame those bodies really became how that works. And so we think about living in a society of fat phobia, we really have to think about the impact that that actually has on communities of color that tend to, lean towards having larger bodies, bigger hips, just more fat and things like that based off of their ancestors and what happens. And so realistically, what we're looking at here is that in communities of color, individuals are a lot less likely to report any issues with eating. And a lot of that is because they don't think that they're going to be, taken seriously, or they just don't know. And it's just kind of like how they've always lived their lives. And so the body image piece of this is really, really huge. Recently, statistics have shown that Native American women specifically tend to feel the highest desire to change their bodies and lose weight out of any minority communities in the United States. And so again, if we're thinking about all of the systemic trauma, generational issues that you're having, plus racism and all of these kinds of things on top of trying to allow your body just to function and just be accepted every day, it's a lot of stress to go through. And so, as we kind of discussed earlier, like stress eating is real. It releases all of those feel good hormones and makes us feel good, but also creates a lot of comfort for us. And so, I want to talk a little bit about how low income, specifically in minority areas, can impact what disordered eating and eating disordered look like. So sometimes what you get into is forced food restriction for families who maybe have lower incomes, or maybe utilizing government assistance, and maybe they just don't have enough money to make things last, and so they're utilizing things like food pantries and on top of that government assistance to feed the family, but it's maybe just not enough for the amount of members that are in that family. And so you kind of have to make things stretch. And it's kind of the typical trope of like everybody's getting these small portions and maybe one of the parents doesn't eat. And so there's forced food restriction there. And so as we've talked about before, like, restricting like almost always leads to binging. And so sometimes what'll happen is that they'll get what they call fun items. A lot of people who grow up in those areas called them fun items. And so those would be like cakes and cookies and things like that, and how those foods get demolished in their houses immediately, because you just don't know when you're going to get it. And so that is kind of how binging works. It's like you get one thing, you go crazy, because you don't know when you're going to get it again. So that forced food restriction is one thing just from the income situation. If you talk about food deserts as well, and so those are areas where there just isn't access to, like produce basically, or any just like big grocery stores to allow you to have a large variety of food to choose from, right? And so you're looking again at like maybe they don't have as much stock in, or maybe you're not getting in all of the nutrients you need. And so, there's some deficiencies that come with that. And again, that restriction. If we flip that on the restriction side and we talk about some of the binging that happens, a lot of food hoarding is a thing. And so one of the things to kind of look out for, like specifically with kids, is, if they're collecting a lot of food from their peers, just kind of holding on to it. And then, they come home and you're like, where did you get all that food from? They're just kind of like hoarding and holding on to this food because they don't know when they're going to get any more. And so you do get some of that binging, but food hoarding tends to be a lot higher in those communities. I know that that seems kind of dark and it kind of feels like a bad thing. I think it's really just about recognizing that some of the factors that feed into having an eating disorder as a minority can be vastly different than some other things. And so sometimes it's not about a specific trauma, but about like your environmental circumstances and how that has shaped your relationship with food and your relationship with your body and how that happens. And so if you come from one of those communities or you notice that this is your behavior, based off of how you grew up, like don't freak out. There's nothing wrong here. It's really just about recognizing like, oh, like maybe there are some places where I can create a little bit more security and a little bit more stability in my relationship with food to just allow me to be successful long term. So the idea is that we're able to just create a nice feeling of like there is hope outside of these feelings that you're having. And so again, I know it can feel like a lot like dropping words like racism and like fat phobia, like those are really big terms. But realistically speaking, it's really just to kind of help you realize like you're not weird if this is how you're feeling, like you're not abnormal if this is what you're feeling, like you're being seen. Like I see you, I hear you, I recognize your struggles, and I want you to know that there are plenty of providers out there just like me who want to help you find the freedom that you need to feel like you're being successful all the time.